I didn't plan to ruin my sister's wedding, but the moment I saw my name on that envelope, I knew I wasn't leaving quietly, because everything they told her was a lie. My name is Emily Parker. I'm 29 years old, and 2 weeks ago I stood in a ballroom that cost more than my entire student loan debt, watching my parents cry happy tears for my sister, the golden child, the one they said was worth investing in. They paid $85,000 for her wedding, the venue, the designer dress, even the $12,000 floral arch she walked under like royalty, and me? I got a $50 gift card and a seat at table 17, next to the restroom, but this didn't start at the wedding. It started years earlier, in a quiet kitchen where my father looked at me and said, "We have to be practical, Emily. Your sister has a future that makes sense." I remember nodding like I understood, like I agreed, but here's the thing about being the daughter they don't choose. You learn to stop asking. You learn to build quietly, while they're busy celebrating someone else, and for years, that's exactly what I did. No support. No safety net, just me, working double shifts, calculating rent down to the dollar, teaching myself things no one thought I was capable of, and they never noticed. Not once. Until that night. Until the wedding. Until the speech. Because what they didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that someone else had been watching, and she left me something that was never meant for my sister, and when I finally stepped up to that microphone, I wasn't just giving a speech. I was about to change everything. The truth is, my parents did not suddenly decide I was less important. I was always less important. I just did not realize how deep it went until I started paying attention to the details. Small things at first. Things people would call insignificant, like how my sister Olivia got a brand new car on her 16th birthday, white convertible, red ribbon, the whole driveway moment, and I got her old laptop, missing keys, battery dying after 40 minutes. "It still works," my mom said with a smile that felt rehearsed, or the way family dinners worked. Olivia talked, everyone listened. I talked, someone checked their phone or changed the subject, or worse, nodded like I was background noise, and then there were the photos, every holiday, every milestone. Olivia in the center, glowing, framed, and me somewhere at the edge, sometimes literally cut out when they printed them. I used to think it was accidental, until I realized it never happened to her, not once, but the moment that really stayed with me, the one that never left, was the night we both got our college acceptance letters, same day, same kitchen. Olivia got into a private university, tuition $55,000 a year. My dad stood up like he had just closed a $1 million deal. "We will cover everything," he said, room, board, tuition. Olivia cried. My mom hugged her. They opened a bottle of champagne, and then my dad turned to me. Same tone, same calm voice. "Emily, we think it is better if you figure this out on your own." Just like that. No apology. No discussion, like I was a different category entirely. I remember asking why, not emotional, just confused, and he said something I will never forget. "Olivia has a return on investment. You are more independent." Independent. That was the word they used when they did not want to invest in me, and from that moment on, everything made sense. I stopped expecting help, stopped asking for anything. I got 2 part-time jobs before I even started school, waitressing nights, tutoring on weekends. I calculated every dollar, every bill. I knew exactly how much it cost to survive, because no one was covering anything for me, and here is the part they never noticed, while they were funding Olivia's life. I was building mine, quietly, no announcements, no applause, just progress, one step at a time, but even then, even after everything, I still showed up for them. Birthdays, holidays, every event where I stood there smiling like I belonged, like I had not spent years being treated like an afterthought. And Olivia, she never questioned it, never asked why things were different. She just accepted it, like she deserved more, like I deserved less. And maybe that is why what happened next hit so hard, because it was not just about money, it was about something much bigger, something they had been hiding for years, something that was never meant to come out, until the one person they underestimated decided to leave me a way to see it clearly. Her name was Margaret Ellis, my grandmother, and if there was one person in this family who ever really saw me, it was her. But even Even that came quietly, like everything else in my life. She never made grand speeches, never announced her support in front of everyone. Instead, she would call me on Sunday mornings, same time every week. 9 a.m. sharp. "Emily," she would say, her voice steady but warm. "Tell me what you are working on," not how I was feeling, not small talk, what I was building, what I was thinking. She listened, really listened, in a way no one else ever did, and when I talked about numbers, plans, ideas, she did not interrupt. She leaned in. Like it mattered, like I mattered, and that was new for me, because in my parents' house, attention was something you had to compete for, and I had already lost that competition years ago. But with her, there was no competition, just space. I remember one afternoon during my second year of college. I was sitting on the floor of my apartment, unpaid electricity bill on the table, doing the math over and over again, trying to figure out which expense I could delay without consequences, and my phone rang. It was her. She asked what I was doing. And for the first time, I told the truth. I told her everything, the jobs, the stress, the fact that I was choosing between groceries and utilities that month. There was a pause, not awkward, just heavy, like she was processing something bigger than what I said, and then she asked one question. "Did you ask your parents for help?" I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was obvious. "No," I said. "I already know the answer." Another pause, longer this time, and then she said something that stayed with me. "There is a difference, Emily, between not needing help and not being given a choice." I did not respond, because I did not know how, but she understood anyway. She always did. After that call, things started to change, slowly, subtly. She never handed me money directly, never made it obvious, but opportunities began to appear. A referral for a paid internship that I never applied for, a small consulting project from one of her old business contacts, introductions to people who actually opened doors, not because they pitied me, but because someone they respected vouched for me, and that someone was her. I did not realize it at the time, but she was building something around me, quietly, strategically, the same way I was building my life, and every time I visited her apartment. Upper East Side, old building, polished wood floors, the kind of place that felt like history lived in the walls. She would ask me questions that no one else ever asked. "What do you see that others miss? If you had control, what would you change?" She was not just listening, she was testing, guiding, preparing, and once, about a year before she passed, she showed me something, a small envelope, cream-colored, my name written on it in her handwriting. "This is not for now," she said, placing it back in a drawer. "But one day, you will understand why it matters." I did not push. I never pushed with her, because with her, timing meant everything. And then, 3 months later, she was gone, just like that, quiet, no drama, no warning, the kind of absence that does not announce itself, but changes everything. The funeral was exactly what you would expect, controlled, composed, my parents standing at the front, speaking about legacy, about family values, about everything she built, but not once did they mention the conversations, the decisions, the things she had been putting in motion behind the scenes, and I remember standing there, listening, realizing something that made my chest tighten. They had no idea who she really was, not completely, not the way I did. And that was the moment I started paying closer attention, because if my grandmother had been planning something important enough to hide, then whatever it was never meant for everyone. It was meant for someone specific, and deep down, I think I already knew who that was. I just did not know how far it would go, or how much it would change everything I thought I understood about my own family. The will reading happened 3 days after the funeral. Quiet office, polished wood table, the kind of place where everything feels official before anyone even speaks. My parents sat across from the attorney like they already knew how this would go, confident, composed. Olivia next to them, perfectly dressed, perfectly calm, like this was just another step in a life that had always gone her way, and I sat at the end of the table, not expecting anything, because I had learned not to. The attorney cleared his throat. adjusted his glasses, and started with the usual language, formal, distant, talking about assets, properties, distributions, words that sounded important but felt disconnected, until he paused, just slightly, and looked down at his second folder. Thinner, separate from the rest. I noticed it immediately, because it was the only thing on that table that did not seem rehearsed. There is an additional provision, he said, and for the first time, my father leaned forward, just a fraction, enough to show interest, enough to show control shifting. The attorney continued. This provision was added 6 months prior to Mrs. Ellis's passing, and it outlines a separate allocation to a specific beneficiary. Olivia smiled, small, confident, like she already knew, like of course it would be her. It had always been her, but then the attorney said my name. Emily Parker, and for a second, no one moved, not even me, because my brain did not register it as real. My mother blinked, like she misheard. My father frowned, subtle, controlled, but there. Olivia's smile. It did not disappear, it froze, like something cracked underneath it. The attorney slid the folder toward me, and that was when I saw it. The same handwriting, the same cream paper, the same envelope I had seen in my grandmother's drawer. Only this time, it was in front of me, real, official, mine. My hands did not shake, not because I was calm, but because I had trained myself not to react in rooms like that. I opened it slowly, aware of every eye on me, and inside, there were documents, detailed, precise, not emotional, not sentimental, structured, intentional. It was not just money, it was control, shares, accounts. Access to a portfolio I did not even know existed, numbers that did not make sense at first, because they were larger than anything I had ever seen attached to my name. But what mattered more, what hit harder, was the note attached. 1 page, her handwriting. Steady, unmistakable. Emily, if you are reading this, then I am no longer there to say it out loud, so I will say it here. I watched everything, not just what they did, but what they chose not to do, and I made a decision based on that. You were never given what you earned, so I am correcting that, not out of sympathy, but because you understand what this requires. Do not announce this. Do not explain it. Timing matters, and when the moment comes, you will know. I read it twice, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to be sure. Every word, every intention, and when I looked up, the room had changed. The air felt different, heavier. My father was staring at the documents, not at me, calculating. My mother looked confused, unsettled, like something had broken in a way she could not immediately fix, and Olivia, she was looking at me for the first time, really looking, not past me, not through me, at me, and there was something new in her. Expression, not anger, not yet, but uncertainty. The kind that comes when a story you have believed your entire life suddenly does not hold. The attorney continued speaking, explaining terms, conditions, structures, but I barely heard him. Because in that moment, everything aligned, every conversation with my grandmother, every question she asked, every opportunity that appeared out of nowhere, it was not random, it was preparation, and the one thing that stayed with me, louder than anything else in that room, was that one line. Do not announce this, because she knew exactly how this family worked. She knew what would happen if they found out too early, and as we stood up to leave, my father finally spoke, calm, measured. We will need to review this in detail, not congratulations, not acknowledgement, just control, always control. I nodded, because I understood the game now, and as we walked out of that office, Olivia caught up to me, her voice lower than usual. Did you know about this? Simple question, but loaded. I met her eyes, held it just long enough, and said, no, which was the truth, just not the whole truth, because what I knew, what I felt, was something else entirely. This was not the end of anything, it was the beginning, and the moment that would matter had not happened yet. It was a week later when everything finally unfolded. I had been walking around in a daze, the weight of my grandmother's letter still heavy in my pocket. Her words echoed in my mind, like a call to action I wasn't ready for, but I knew the time had come. My parents had been pretending like everything was fine, as if the will didn't matter, like it was just another piece of paper, but I knew differently. I could feel the tension mounting every time we spoke, even when we spoke about trivial things. The discomfort was there. I could tell they were trying to figure out how to fix it, how to change the narrative they had carefully built over the years, but they couldn't. Not this time, not when the truth was already in motion. Olivia didn't know what was coming, and she wouldn't know until it was too late, but I knew exactly what I was doing. I had to make sure everything was set before I made my move, because when the moment arrived, it would change everything. It all started with a simple phone call from one of my grandmother's old friends, someone who had known her longer than anyone else in our family, a man named Harold Caldwell, the same lawyer who had been handling the trust. I didn't recognize the number at first, but something about it felt important. I picked up, and his voice was calm, professional. "Emily, I believe it is time for us to talk about the next steps." That was all he said at first. The next steps, like everything was already in motion. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew something big was about to happen. I scheduled a meeting with him for the following afternoon, and as soon as I hung up the phone, I felt my heart race. Everything felt surreal, like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking at a future I had no control over. But then I realized something. I had more control than I had ever imagined. I had been given an opportunity to take back what I had lost, to finally have a seat at the table, to claim what was mine, without apology, without hesitation, and I wasn't going to let this slip through my fingers. The next day, I met Harold at his office, a small, quiet place tucked away in a corner of the city. The kind of place that felt like it held secrets, old documents, faded leather chairs, shelves full of history. I walked in, my heart pounding, but I held my head high, because this was it, the moment when everything would change. Harold greeted me with a warm smile, but I could tell he was just as anxious as I was. He didn't waste time with small talk. "I assume you've read the documents," he said, his voice steady. "And I trust you understand the gravity of what's at stake." I nodded, and my mind raced as he continued. "Your grandmother was a very calculating woman, and she left behind more than just assets. She left a legacy that has always been kept from you, but not anymore." He paused, letting that sink in, letting the weight of it all hang in the air, before pulling out a large folder. It was thick, filled with pages I had never seen before, documents, legal jargon, notes that were impossible to ignore. He slid them across the table toward me. "This is your inheritance," he said quietly. But it wasn't just money, it was control. It was access to everything they thought they had locked away, and more importantly, it was something they never expected me to have. I opened the folder slowly, letting the reality of it all wash over me. There were accounts, investments, shares in companies I had no idea my grandmother owned, properties, businesses, all tied to her name, and all mine now. Everything my parents had spent their lives building, trying to claim, was suddenly within my reach. I felt a rush of emotion, but I held it in, because I knew this was the moment. This was my chance to finally take back what was rightfully mine. Harold watched me closely, like he knew exactly what I was thinking, and then he said the words that changed everything. "It's time to make the decision, Emily. Your family has been waiting for this moment for years, but now it's in your hands." I took a deep breath, the weight of his words settling in, because it wasn't just about the money. It was about everything I had been denied, all the years of being pushed aside, overlooked, treated like I was invisible, but not anymore. I was going to make them see me, and I was. Going to do it in a way they never expected. I stood up, looked him in the eyes, and said, "I'm ready." I was ready to take control, ready to change everything, because now it was my turn to rewrite the story, and no one, not even my parents, could stop me. It wasn't long after my meeting with Harold that the real planning began. I had everything I needed, the papers, the assets, the confirmation that everything my grandmother had kept hidden for years was finally in my hands. But there was one thing I needed to do before I made any move, before I claimed what was mine. I had to give my parents a chance to prove who they really were, to see if they would finally recognize me for what I had become, or if they would continue to pretend that I was still the same invisible daughter they had pushed aside for so long. The first time I saw them after my meeting with Harold, it was a Sunday evening, casual family dinner, typical. Olivia was sitting at the head of the table, as always, my mother fussing over the menu, my father flipping through his phone like he had a million things to do. But I noticed something that night, something small but telling. My parents were looking at me differently, not with the same detached disregard I had grown so used to, but with something new, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. When I sat down at the table, my father looked up and said, "How's work, Emily?" It was a simple question, but it felt like a trap, a way to see if I would fall into the same old pattern, if I would answer humbly, shy away from the truth. But I didn't. I leaned in slightly, looked him right in the eyes, and said, "I've been doing well. Better than I expected." I paused for a moment, watching their reactions. My mother's eyes darted away, like she was hoping I hadn't noticed how uncomfortable she looked. My father, on the other hand, said nothing, just nodded, like he was already dismissing me in his mind. And Olivia, she was smiling, like she already knew the answer, but I wasn't playing this game anymore. Not with them, not with anyone. I had learned too much. I had come too far to be anyone's second choice again. I needed them to see me for who I was now, not for the version of me they had decided I should be. I knew the time was approaching, the moment when everything would come to a head, and when it did, I wouldn't hold back. The next week, I sent an email to the family, one that would change everything. I scheduled a meeting at Harold's office, the one place I knew they couldn't avoid, and I made sure the subject line was simple, clear. Family meeting, important discussion regarding the inheritance. I didn't expect them to show up willingly, but I also didn't expect them to back out. My father, always the one to keep control of the situation, responded almost immediately. "We'll be there." It was a calculated response, but it was all I needed. The stage was set, the roles were clear, and all I had to do now was let them walk right into the trap they had no idea I was setting for them. The day of the meeting, I arrived early. Harold was already there, reviewing the documents, and I could feel the excitement building, not because of the money, not because of the assets, but because this was the moment I would finally confront them. And it wasn't going to be a quiet conversation. The door opened, and my parents walked in, my father first, as always, his presence commanding the room. Olivia beside him, looking like she was attending a business meeting, always polished, always perfect, but not this time. This time, they were going to hear the truth. I stood up as they entered, my hands steady, my voice calm. "Thank you for coming," I said, keeping it formal. "Please sit down. We have a lot to discuss." The silence in the room was heavy, and I could see my father growing impatient. "What is this about, Emily?" he asked, his voice already laced with skepticism. I looked at him, my gaze unwavering. "This is about everything you've been hiding from me, everything you thought I didn't know." I reached for the folder Harold had prepared for me and slid it across the table toward them. "This is the inheritance. The one you thought was going to Olivia," I said, making sure to keep my voice steady. "But it's mine now, and I want you to understand why." The room fell completely still. Olivia's smile faltered. She looked between my father and me, clearly trying to process what was happening. My mother, on the other hand, was frozen, her face pale, like the ground was slipping out from under her. My father opened the folder slowly, flipping through the pages with an increasing sense of disbelief, and I could see the tension building in him. He looked at me, then back at the documents, like he was trying to find a way to explain it away. But there was no explanation, not this time. "Emily," my father finally said, his voice tight, "you don't have any right to this. This was meant for Olivia." I interrupted him, cutting through the lie. "No, it was never meant for Olivia. And you know it." I stood up, walking around the table, standing directly in front of them now. "This is what I've earned. This is what I've built, and I don't need your approval anymore." For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound in the room was the slow turning of pages as my father continued to review the documents. But the look on his face was no longer one of authority, it was one of confusion. And that was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment I realized I had already won. The silence in the room felt suffocating as my father continued to scan the documents, his brow furrowed, clearly processing something he didn't expect to see. Olivia, still sitting there, had gone completely still, her usual confidence replaced with a quiet unease. She glanced at my father, then back at the papers in front of her, but I didn't care about her confusion anymore. My eyes were on my father, the man who had always controlled every decision, every moment of my life, and now, for the first time, the control was in my hands. Slowly, he looked up, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Emily, you don't understand. This wasn't how things were supposed to be." I felt a flicker of something sharp inside me, anger, frustration, but I pushed it down, keeping my voice calm. "I understand perfectly well, Dad," I said, standing up straighter. "I just think it's time you understood that I'm not the daughter you can push around anymore." The tension was thick in the room, and my mother, who had been silent until now, finally spoke, her voice shaky. "What is this, Emily? Why are you doing this to us?" I could hear the panic in her tone, but I refused to soften my stance. "This isn't about punishing anyone. This is about finally being seen for who I am, not who you've always wanted me to be." My father shook his head, as if trying to reset the narrative in his mind, but I could see the cracks appearing. He was losing his grip. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice firm but laced with uncertainty. "All of this, it was meant for Olivia. She's the one who will carry the family forward." I shook my head, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. "No, that's the lie you've been telling yourselves for years," I said, "and now it's time to face the truth." Olivia looked between us, her face flushed with a mix of confusion and something else I couldn't quite read. I didn't care. I was done being the background character in the story. I was done being the one who got nothing, while Olivia got everything. The room seemed to shrink, the weight of everything hanging in the air like a storm about to break. I watched my father's face, his eyes narrowing, calculating, but also realizing there was no way out of this. "You think this changes everything, don't you?" he said, his voice now tinged with something more bitter. "You think this will make up for all the years of work we've put in? All the sacrifices we've made for this family?" My heart pounded, but I held my ground. "I'm not here to make up for anything," I replied. "I'm here to claim what's mine, the opportunity you took from me." My mother's face went pale as the realization set in. They had underestimated me for too long, and now I was in control. The silence stretched out again, but this time, it didn't feel oppressive, it felt powerful. I let the weight of the moment sink in before I spoke again. "You want to know what's really been missing from this family? It's not money, it's not even legacy," I said. "It's respect and recognition, something you've never given me, no matter how hard I tried to earn it." I saw a flicker of something in my father's eyes, doubt, maybe, even regret, but it was fleeting. He quickly masked it, though his next words were softer than before. "Emily, I don't know what you expect to happen here." I leaned in slightly, my voice unwavering. "I expect to finally have a say in my own life, and I'm not asking for permission anymore." The tension in the room was palpable. It was no longer about the money or the assets. It was about control, about power, and the realization that I no longer needed to beg for either. I watched my father carefully, this man who had always been a pillar of strength, who had never once considered that his own daughter might one day stand up to him. But here I was, doing just that, and as I looked around the room, I realized something. This wasn't just about me, this was about breaking the cycle, about making sure that no one else ever felt like I did, invisible, unheard, left behind. My father sat back, his face a mix of disbelief and frustration. Olivia looked away, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She had no idea how this would play out. None of us did, but for the first time, it didn't matter. I was no longer at their mercy. I could feel the shift in the air, the change in the dynamic, and I knew, deep down, this was just the beginning, for all of us, and the next move? That was mine to make. The following week, I found myself back at the same table. This time, it wasn't a confrontation anymore, it was a decision. I had done what I set out to do. I had